Anyway, we were talking about irony in Story of an Hour. Irony, the device in which the unexpected occurs. It's unexpected for a woman to feel joy when her husband dies. That's a bit of situational irony. It's also ironic that once she finds her newfound freedom, she loses it immediately and dies. No one would expect that. It's also ironic that the husband's alive. You know, he's the one thought dead, he's alive, and then she dies. These are all examples of situational irony. I had noted, and Maria Moyano, who I know as Begonia, and I don't know if you all know her or if she signs off as Begonia, but she made the point about the irony in the story. You know, and I think it's true that Mrs. Mallard basically dies of shock, you know, not guilt so much, but probably disappointment. And I think it was Val that said she got a little confused because the doctor said she died of a joy that kills. But see, that's an example of dramatic irony. There's situational irony, the unexpected happens. There's dramatic irony. The audience knows something that the characters do not. And because of the third person limited omniscient point of view, there's a narrator outside the story telling the story. The narrator is all-knowing, knows what, you know, Richards did, double-check before he came to bring the news, knows what Josephine's doing, but it's limited omniscient because it's mostly from the viewpoint of Mrs. Mallard. And so we're allowed to see into the heart and the head of Mrs. Mallard as she's having her epiphany upstairs that she's free. We wouldn't be able to know the story if Mrs. Mallard told her own story, because she dies at the end, so she couldn't tell her own story. So couldn't have a first-person narrator. This is a third-person, limited, omniscient narrator. Because we know that Mrs. Mallard is overjoyed at the idea of being free, we know that she didn't really die of a joy that kills. She died from disappointment or shock, but not joy. She probably wasn't joyful to see her husband alive. So, Valerie, even though that confused you initially, the doctor said that because the characters don't know something that the readers know, and that is that Mrs. Mallard was not happy in her marriage and was very excited about the idea of being free. So the other kind of irony is called verbal irony, and that is when a character says something that he or she does not mean, or means something quite different. There's no real verbal irony in the story because the doctors really think she dies of a joy that kills. We'll see examples of verbal irony later. But for Story of an Hour, you got the conflict pretty much right. You get when the climax is, when that conflict is resolved. Irony is another term. And then as we keep studying literature, we talk about point of view, and we'll keep talking about point of view and narrator. All right, so from Steeler Nation, C16, Eastern Shore Community College, I'll say goodbye.